Okay, so this talk is divided into parts. First, we'll have a quick look at the Neoarchean tectonomagmatic evolution of the central part, the interior part of the Iliac craton. And then we'll have a quick look on the tectonic and metamorphic evolution of the western margin of the craton, focusing on the chiltering metamorphic belt. So the idea here is to provide a quick overview and to highlight what these domains have in common and where they differ. So the Archean lithosphere, which is now preserved in Archean cratons, preserve a record of 2 billion years of production and recycling of crust through widespread magmatism. And eventually this continuous magmatism would have led to accumulation of dry and residual lithologies in the uppermost mantle, in the lithosphere, and in the lower crust. And these lithologies are of course very stiff, and this will eventually have led to cratonization. So we want to test this concept, and we want to see what the UME terrain has to say about this topic. And so what is an Archean craton? Is a portion of a continental plate that basically has been substantially untouched since the end of the Archean. And this is because it has a very thick mantle keel. In the Ilian, it's about 250 kilometers. And this keel is dry, it's cold, it's buoyant, and it's very stiff. And this explains the survival of these cratons, which basically they can resist continental collision and so reworking from the top, but they can also resist erosion from the bottom, from the convecting mantle, from the asthenosphere. On the other hand, craton margins are expected to have recorded several tectonometamorphic events as these cratons drift around the planet's surface and they collide with each other. And we want to test these ideas with a case studies from the western margin of the craton. But let's start from the heart of the UME, of the Ilian craton, really. So we all know it's well visible in any geological map or any geophysical data sets. The Ilian exposes a series of craton-wide shear zones. And over the years, we've published several contributions detailing the evolution of each of these shear zones. So, well, it would have been written there in the black box. I don't know why it's black, but this is for a paper that we have now in review. And actually, I've just heard this morning from the editor that has been well received. So in this paper, we're trying to do something different. We step back a little bit and we try to have a look at the craton-wide distribution of these shear zones and what they have in common and what is the driving mechanism of these shearing events. So the main message, again, it would have been under this black box, is that basically all these shear zones have a component of their shearing history that developed in the presence of magma. So there's, at least in part, there are magmatic shear zones. And collectively, they cover a time span, the shearing activity of the shear zones cover a time span of about 100 million years. So when we put this in a time space, basically we have what in a few publications we have creatively called Ilian orogeny, which was a long period of regional deformation during which magmatism was associated with transpression. So we have the incremental assembly of these syntectonic plutons as tabular plutons. So in map view, they look very elongate with high aspect ratio. In the third dimension, they're actually wedge-shaped. And before that, in pre-orogenic times, we have the granitic magma was mainly delivered through diaperism, and this, as Tim has mentioned before, is well preserved in the western part of the craton and in the Yagoo area. Then after the orogeny, as we say, we have the cratonization. When we look at the geochemistry, or the granite geochemistry within these shear zones, the strong message that comes out from here, which is relevant to this story, is that all these shear zones include granitic components that have lower crustal and upper mantle sources. So they are very deep sources. And this is consistent with the fact that what we know from the seismic data, which show that all these craton-wide shear zones, they are deeply rooted shear zones. They go down to the base of the crust. So again, this from this manuscript that we have now in review, the idea that we are suggesting here that these crustal scale shear zones basically allow a direct connection between the surface and the deep portions of the lithosphere. So they are the most obvious pathways for upward transfer of magma, heat, and or enriched fluids. Let's think about, for example, the link between gold and sanukitoids. Sanukitoids are magmas that are originated in the mantle. And so, for example, for gold deposits, after these stages of magmatic synorogenic shearing, we have the emplacement of potassium-rich to A-type granitic rocks. These are very high temperature magmas, and this will have generated a perfect hydrothermal system that will have allowed basically the rework and the final development of the gold deposits in the Ilian Craton, which we know are at about this age are of a later Archean age. And then eventually we have cratonization. What happens after cratonization? Well, not much happens within the craton in the interiors. Basically, the main event is represented by a series of various generations of mafic dikes that get in place with various orientations, and themselves these dikes are a symptom of a cratonized lithosphere. Because if before the lithosphere was deforming in a pervasive way, developing ductile fabrics when it was subjected to regional deformation, now in post-Archean times, basically, when stress is applied, basically this lithosphere cracks in a more brittle way. So there is a secular transition in bulk rheology of the lithosphere. And all the action basically moves around the shift towards the craton boundaries. So we have two orogens that develop in the north and the south of the craton. In the north, of course, in the Capricorn area, we have that belt developed in the Proterozoic during the collision between the Ilian and the Pilbara cratons. While in the west, we have the Pinjar orogen, which itself is a precursor of the Mesozoic Darling Fault, and they are both subparallel to the structural grain that we see within the craton, suggesting that structural inheritance here might have played an important role for the development of this belt in the west. So when we zoom into the Chittering belt here, while field work is continuing along basically the whole length of the western margin, the Chittering belt basically exposes a high-strain sequence of metasedimentary and meta-igneous rocks. Most of them, they have relict migmatitic structures, and they are intruded mainly in the southern portion of the belt by late Archean grains of the Darling Range batholith, and also are intruded by two generations of gabbroic dikes. One is late Archean and one is 1200 MA. And importantly, these grains that intrude the southern part of the belt in the late Archean, they are regionally undeformed, and we'll come back to this a bit later. So, as I said, it's a high-strain belt. Undeformed rocks are very rare within the Chittering belt, and in particular, we identify two main network of shear zones. We have the Swan Gorge Mylonite zone, which is a sinistral oblique slip, so normal kinematics west side down, and it's basically responsible for the main cluster of lineations that we see here in the center of the net. And then we have the Lady Spring shear zone, which is again sinistra, but in this case strike slip, so we have subhorizontal lineations. And it's mainly, we have constrictional fabrics as well, and it's mainly developed in the western half of the belt. You see the lineation is colored by the plunge, and you feel the light colors in the west. And what is more relevant here is that both sets of shear zones are developed within the 1200 MA dolerite. So we know that these are Proterozoic fabrics, at least in part. When we look at the microstructures, in metasedimentary rocks, we have synkinematic kyanite, which in turn is replaced by synkinematic sillimanite, So we know that shearing during Proterozoic years started at temperature greater than about 500 degrees and then continued during exhumation and down to green schist facies conditions. And the migmatites, which we know are Archean because they predate the emplacement of the Darling Range. Basalts in the late Archean, and of course are better preserved when we move away from the Proterozoic shear zones, so in the low strain domains. In this example, they are basically perfectly preserved leucosomes in this tonalitic gneiss with very diffuse boundaries. And even in thin section, the microstructure is well preserved. We produce some microstructural data testifying that basically this fabric developed at temperature near the granite solids. Just a quick view on the in-progress data that we have in terms of geochronology. We have some in situ mutation data from Granite, 4 samples for now. So we have about 2.9 GA age in weakly retrogressed migmatites, and we believe this might be representative of our regional scale migmatitic event. We just heard about very old ages in this part of the world, and Cat's work is just a few tens of kilometers west, basically, from this belt. Then we have a late Archean age, which basically overlaps, again, in metasedimentary rocks. This age basically overlaps with the age of the Darling Range basalts, so it might represent a contact metamorphism event at that time. And then we have 1 or 2 pulses of metamorphism at around 740 to 780, which we know predate the development of the main shear fabrics. And shear fabrics that we're trying to date also with the use of mica, again, rubidium strontium in situ, and this is with Chris Kirkland and at Curtin University. And the results that we have for now, again, partial results, work in progress. We have ages clustering between 600 and 650 MA for biotite. We believe these are cooling age, representing basically the moment where the system cooled down to the closure temperature of the rubidium strontium system. So this will also represent the minimum age of the shear fabric in the belt. And from muscovite, we have ages clustering around 750, which we believe are the maximum ages of the shear fabric, which therefore will have probably developed in between these two end members. And as I say, we have much more data in progress, also with other chronometers. So the idea is to try to provide tight constraints on the evolution of this belt. As I mentioned before, we have 2 generations of mafic dikes intruded in this belt. We are focusing here on the late Archean dike. We have a 10 kilometers long segment of this dike preserved here in black, in this segment here, preserved in the low strain portion of the belt. Low strain portion with respect to the Proterozoic shear zones, which are in yellow. And the main message here is that this dike is truncating, post-dating the regional scale migmatitic layering that we see throughout the belt. So if this is true, that means that the steep north-striking orientation of this migmatitic layering is an Archean feature. And this will be also consistent with the fact that, as I mentioned before, the late Archean granites of the Darling Range basalts are basically undeformed at the regional scale, so post-Archean tilting of the whole sequence are unlikely. So just to conclude, we have seen that the Archean lithosphere contains a record of 2 billion years of intense magmatism with production and recycling of crust. This is not particularly new, but in this context, the Ilgan example tells us that we have about 100 million years record of synmagmatic shearing along crustal scale shear zones, and we have seen possible implication for mineral systems here. But the ultimate fate of the Archean lithosphere, or at least for those portions that they made it up to us, and so of course there is a preservation bias here. The ultimate phase is always cratonization as a combined effect of magmatism and shearing, and which will have produced the upward movement, migration of fluids and heat-producing elements, leaving behind in the lower portion of the lithosphere, leaving behind dry and residual lithologies, which are very stiff. And then all the action moves toward the craton margins, where we have superposed tectonomagmatic events, and possibly here we can discuss some implications for mineral systems. For example, during the emplacement of the mafic dikes, and we know in some generations they tend to focus along craton margins. And finally, for the case study of the chittering belt teaches us is that the Archean fabrics, one of the main messages we can get from this study is that the Archean fabrics seem to have played a key role in controlling the development of the Proterozoic and Mesozoic fabrics within the western margin of the crater. And okay, I'll leave you here.